You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. They will race behind you. They will stumble. They will fall. But in time, they will join you in the sun count. In time, you will help them accomplish wonders.
This video is not intended to be an examination of the DC universe on film. This is not about James Gunn, or the DCEU, or The Flash, or the current state of superhero films. This video is mainly meant to be a love letter towards Man of Steel, Zack Snyder, and Zack Snyder's vision for the DC universe on film. All the former stuff I've just talked about, like James Gunn's vision for the DCEU, and The Flash, and all that, that's a video for another time. Right now, I just want to talk about Man of Steel, it being 10 years old, which is just insane to me. I remember watching that film when I was 13 years old, and it just utterly inspired me. It made me fall in love with the character of Superman again, and to be honest, as a whole, I just kind of want to walk down memory lane, praise Man of Steel, address its criticisms, but also just express my love for it, because Man of Steel is a film that I think is grossly misunderstood, and also just grossly underrated. As the years have gone by, Man of Steel has aged just incredibly well. Now, I do not think Man of Steel is a perfect film. In fact, I have issues with it myself. And I can also understand some of the issues the general consensus have with the film. Namely, it is a little bit too dour. It's not the most fun of films. And in some ways, I appreciate the fact that the film is all going, hey, have a fun time, this is bright, colourful, blah, blah, blah. I kind of appreciate that it's just going, hey, let's examine the idea of Superman and what Superman would be like in the real world today. And that in itself is kind of the core concept of Zack Snyder's Justice League trilogy. I mean, they labeled it that, obviously Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, and Zack Snyder's Justice League. That is now his Justice League trilogy, even though it was intended like that, but it also wasn't, because he obviously had like a 6-saga film planned and it just didn't pan out. Obviously, again, that's straying away from the topic. I might mention that a little bit later on, but yeah, it's straight away from the topic. Now, before this becomes an absolute love fest towards Man of Steel, I do want to address my criticisms of the film, because yes, there are some that I do agree with, and there are also some that I think are just grossly misrepresented. Whilst I love the filmic look and the high contrast look to Man of Steel, I do think overall the color grading is a bit too dour, a bit too blue, a bit too desaturated. It could use a tad bit of color. A lot of the film is genuinely visually striking, and I absolutely adore it. There are so many just gorgeous shots in the film. But then there are also a couple of shots where I look at it and I go, that's a bit dour, that's a bit depressing. I do kind of get why people say this film looks glum. Also, because of the more desaturated, gritty color grading, Superman's costume does not pop. We've all seen behind the scenes images of Henry Cavill's Superman suit, and that suit is a bright blue and a bright red. And whilst the red translates quite nicely onto the big screen, the blue gets lost. The blue either becomes navy or black in a lot of shots, and I'm not a fan of it. I don't know why Snyder was so insistent on desaturating back the blue, but just the whole point of Superman is that he is supposed to stand out. He's supposed to be the bright symbol of hope. That being said, though, the color grade for this film overall is gorgeous. And I understand now why back in the early 2000s and in the early 2010s, when things were shot on film or when they were shot digitally and made to look like film, we had higher contrast, we had deeper shadows, we had deeper blacks. Because looking at the more present day stuff where there is less contrast and the blacks aren't black but they're more grey, the reason why it was done was to hide the visual effects. It makes the visual effects blend together more seamlessly. And from what I could tell, the way Zack Snyder filmed a lot of the action for this film was very inspired by Michael Bay and the way he filmed his Transformers films, where a lot of the explosions, a lot of the action was done in camera, and for the most part, a lot of the visual effects was just to do with compositing. Now getting on to the story elements that I don't entirely agree with, because whilst I love the fact that this film is kind of a gritty alien invasion story, it's turned the Superman story and gone, hey, what if Superman was treated like an alien and the Kryptonians invading was like a science fiction alien invasion story? There are a couple of things that I'm not a massive fan of, and that mainly being Jonathan Kent's portrayal in certain moments. Because overall, I think Kevin Costner is great as Pa Kent. He really nails the humanity, the warmth, the fatherhood. He's very good.
Can I just keep pretending I'm your son?
You are my son.
But there is the infamous scene where Clark is talking to Pa Kent, and Pa Kent says this.
What was I supposed to do? Just let him die?
Maybe.
Now, to play devil's advocate, I understand the intent behind this. It's Pa Kent worrying about his son and worrying about the fact that if the government finds out that he's an alien, they will take him away from him and experiment on him and torture him And he doesn't want that. It's a father looking out for his son. But on the other hand, after multiple rewatches of this film, I don't entirely gel with the fact that Pa Kent is just okay to let these kids die, because I do understand his position in this moral dilemma. And I do believe that the character genuinely believes that Clark did the right thing in saving the kids, and that he was happy and proud that Clark did the right thing. But it's the moment where he hesitates, where you go, okay, yeah, this is where this is coming from. But then when he says maybe, and he's so matter-of-fact about it, that doesn't sit right with me and a lot of Superman fans, because Pa Kent is the most optimistic character. The Kents are what gives Superman his morality and makes him the most kind-hearted, genuine person. And if I was to redo the scene, I would just have a little bit of a moment where Pa Kent goes, no, Clark, that's not what I meant to say, you did the right thing, but... just adding in that little change of Pa Kent reacting, going, oh, no, that's not what I meant to say, makes him feel more human, makes him feel more genuine, whilst also still retaining the Pa Kent from the comics. Because again, on paper, I get what the character is trying to say, it's just that literally he is kind of just being a bit of an immoral character. And now we get to the tornado scene, and I think the tornado scene is fine. I know people rag on it and they hate it, they think it's stupid and silly. I think it is a genuinely impactful moment in the film. Now, is the classic concept from the Richard Donner film of Pa Kent dying of a heart attack demonstrating the idea that even though Clark Kent has all these powers, he cannot save everyone? Is that a better idea? Yes. But just because the classic Richard Donner film has the better idea does not discredit the impact of the tornado scene. I quite like the tornado scene because, in fact, it demonstrates the idea that Pa Kent believes in his son so much that he is allowing himself to sacrifice himself in order to allow his son the permission to discover who he truly is, to find out what kind of moral character he wants to be, and to allow himself to express himself and expose himself to humanity, to present himself to humanity in the way that he deems fit. The whole theme of Man of Steel is choice, and the film presents that very clearly with Superman's two father figures in Jor-El and Pa Kent. Pa Kent allowed himself, he made the choice to allow himself to die from the tornado so that Clark could not expose himself to the world when he wasn't ready. And Jor-El made the choice to send his baby son Kal to Earth so that he could grow up, be around human culture, away from the idea of Kryptonian culture, grow up to love humanity, and then when he was old enough to make the choice, he could either bring back Krypton or save Earth. Again, the central theme of Man of Steel is choice. And speaking of choice, let's get to the main big issue a lot of people have with this film, that is Superman snapping Zod's neck. That, as a storytelling choice, I am completely fine with. I think it works very well for the film, and in fact, Zack Snyder said he added that in because once Superman stopped the world engine, in the original idea, all the Kryptonians would have been sucked in, and that's it, that's the end of the film. But realistically, the film would have ended on an anticlimax if that was the case. And so you need Superman fighting Zod, and you need Superman to make the horrible choice in deciding to kill Zod. And it's not like Superman was unjustified in killing Zod. There was no way to detain Zod in the immediate vicinity. Zod was going to kill as many people as he could because he had lost his idea of Krypton, and he wanted to destroy everything and take everything away from Kal-El, and so he was just going to kill everybody. When Superman restrained him, he told him many times to stop, and Zod said he never would.
Never.
There was no way for Superman to get out of this situation, and so him killing Zod was the only choice, and it works. And the counter argument I've always heard to this debate is when people go, but why did you write Superman in a situation like this? Why? Don't write him in this situation, write him out of it. Why? Why are we not allowed to tell this more complex side of the story? Why are we not allowed to question the idea of morality and ethics and whether or not Superman did the lesser of two evils? It's not like Superman snapped Zod's neck and then pissed on his corpse and then smiled jovially and cheerily and flew away and was like, haha, I did it, I saved the day, da 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 da. No, he lets out a blood-curdling, remorseful scream. Henry Cavill and Zack Snyder have talked about this. They say that this was the moment that defined Superman's no-kill rule. He'll never do this ever again. And to me, that's an incredibly powerful moment. And the way the whole scene is constructed, it's to make you go that this is a battle between two titans and either one shall stand or one shall fall. And to quote The Dark Knight, this is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. There is no way to deal with this situation in a way that is super positive. Superman, kind of similar to Geralt of Rivia, is dealing with two evils. You know, evil is evil, greater, lesser, middling, and he'd rather not choose at all. However, the difference between Superman and Geralt of Rivia is that Superman is strong enough to make the hard choice for the greater good. And did I mention Geralt of Rivia because Henry Cavill plays him? Maybe, but also, I think you have to break down the idea of moral ethics, because Superman, in the end, did the heroic thing. He did the right thing. He wasn't happy about it, but he had to choose, because if he didn't, millions would have died. Also, Hans Zimmer's score for that scene is phenomenal. It's heartbreaking. When Superman is holding Zod down and the violins kick in, you can feel the conundrum playing in Superman's head, the dilemma of, I really don't want to do this, but I have to, because if I don't, things are going to end horribly. Now, does Zack Snyder go overboard with the action and the destruction porn? Yes, for sure. Like, there are so many moments where it's just like, why is that explosion there? Why did this need to happen? Why did Superman not stop that? Yes, it is there, but overall, it's pretty cool to look at. And I will say, I do not like the cut between Superman killing Zod and then the drone scene with General Swanwick, because why? We needed to fade to black and then have a quick Superman saving people montage thing with the Hans Zimmer playing, showing Superman being heroic and saving people so we can end that dark note on a little happier note. Going from this incredibly hard-hitting emotional moment to just this fun, goofy scene of Superman going, hey, stop following me, and then General Ferris going, oh yeah, I think he's kind of hot. Like, on its own, it's a fun, fine scene, but we needed like a good 2-3 minutes away from the soul-crushing moment of Superman killing Zod, and having Superman just be, heroic and inspiring. But aside from those are really my main issues with Man of Steel. Other than that, I think the film is fantastic. The opening sequence on Krypton is stunning and is amazing, and apparently it was supposed to go on for longer, but they just didn't show it. And I kind of wish we could get to see that stuff, because I loved all of it. Russell Crowe is phenomenal as Jor-El. I genuinely love him so much, and I think he's very underlooked in terms of comic book movie performances, because his performance as Jor-El is phenomenal. The gravitas Russell Crowe brings to Jor-El is just incredible. His line delivery for so many lines are just ingrained in my brain, and he just makes the lines so epic.
The symbol of the House of El means hope. Embodied within that hope is the fundamental belief in the potential of every person to be a force for good.
It's incredible. Like, oh my god. And the dynamic he has with Zod too in the opening scene, where the two of them were colleagues, potentially friends, but they've drifted apart because of their ideologies. It's great stuff. Also, the dialogue he has with Clark that builds up to the first flight sequence is just incredibly epic stuff. A lot of those lines are lifted from Superman comics and the ideas that Superman writers have posed towards Superman, and it's phenomenal. And speaking of Zod, Michael Shannon as General Zod is just an incredibly intimidating presence on screen. He is truly a maniac, but also you understand Zod's motivations because he is a soldier of Krypton. He wants to save his people. He is genetically engineered to fight for his people. And so when he sees the opportunity to find the Codex and to bring back Krypton on Earth, he'll take it without question. And when Superman decides to go against him and stop him, and Superman succeeds in stopping him, General Zod snaps and goes, you've killed my people, I'm now going to kill your people. You chose them over us, you're not part of us, I hate you, and I'm going to destroy everything you love. Zod is just an epic villain in this film, and I think he is in the upper echelon, the upper tier of comic book movie villains, because Michael Shannon plays his character perfectly, and I love the way the character's written. The supporting cast of this film is also great. Anjay Trau, I think that's how you pronounce her name, as Feora is incredible. Feora, badass soldier, incredibly gorgeous, could kick your ass. She is so good. Her screen presence is awesome. Laurence Fishburne as Perry White is fantastic, and I wish we got to see more of him. He's so good as Perry White, and again, sucks that we didn't get a Man of Steel 2 because he would have been great. Diane Lane as Martha Kent is also fantastic, and do you know what really bugs me? The people that dislike this film have the audacity to say that Man of Steel has no heart. What are these moments then?
Focus on my voice. Pretend it's an island out in the ocean. Can you see it?
I see it.
Then swim towards it, honey.
If that isn't heart, then I don't know what is. Like, what more do you want? Do you want Superman to just like hug his mom and be like, I love you, mom, you're the best thing I've ever seen. I love you so much. I love you more than anything in the universe, in the entire multiverse. No. What are they talking about? Amy Adams, I also think, is just wonderful as Lois Lane, and I think she's probably my favorite on-screen Lois Lane, because She's competent, she's involved in the plot, she is the damsel in distress sometimes, because obviously it's Lois Lane, she's like one of the most famous damsel in distresses, but also she is incredibly gumptious. She reminds me of animated Lois Lane to a point. Amy Adams plays the role very well, and I like her and Henry Cavill together. Speaking of Henry Cavill, let's get to it. The Man of Steel himself, my favorite Superman actor. Henry Cavill is phenomenal as Superman. I will say that till the day I die. Now, Christopher Reeve is probably the best Superman. There is no arguing that he is the most iconic. In many ways, he has shaped and formed all the iterations of Superman that have come after him, and in many ways, he is the ideal version of Superman. But Henry Cavill to me brings such a depth, a warmth, a heart, a sincerity towards Superman, a vulnerability towards Superman that I just emotionally connected with him. Man of Steel is the story about a man in search for himself, and by the end, he does find who he is. And I find that story to be incredibly compelling. And Henry Cavill just sells every scene he's in. I love him so much. He brings such a sincerity towards Superman. And when he is being Superman and he's talking to people, he has the charm. He has the charisma. He is more than capable of being the perfect Superman for many people, because he brings in that Christopher Reeve-like energy whilst also retaining his own idea and concept of the character, whilst also making Superman look like a badass. Also, I don't get people's issues when they say that Henry Cavill's Superman doesn't save people, because the whole first third of Man of Steel is Superman saving people, and when he's in the middle of these big fights, you're not going to go around saving people when you're fighting your enemies because you're focused on the fight. Like when Superman and Zod are like punching each other through buildings and Superman's like scraping Zod across the building, yeah, he would do that because he's in a fight. I really don't understand why people are so adverse to the destruction in Man of Steel. Like, I get it, it is a bit too over the top at times, but for the most part, most superhero films before this were just as destructive. In fact, even in a post-Man of Steel world, a lot of the superhero films that involve collateral damage still have damage on this type of scale. But anyways, getting back to Henry Cavill, because the thing about Henry Cavill too is that he looks like Superman. He is just the embodiment of that character brought to life. Because in a lot of ways, Henry Cavill looks like a lot of the Superman artist renderings. That being said, there are some artists, I think Gary Frank, the one that did Superman Secret Origin, tends to draw Superman to look like Christopher Reeve, but for the most part, Henry Cavill looks like the standard drawing of Superman. And he is just incredibly handsome and charming and buff, and he's Superman. That, like, plain and simple. You look at this guy and you go, yep, that's Superman. And whilst I do think Henry Cavill gets overshadowed in Batman vs. Superman by Ben Affleck as Batman, he is still a very good portrayal as Superman, and that film in itself does its own thing with Superman, and I think in Zack Snyder's Justice League, when he shows up, he leaves an impact. He's Superman. He shows up and you're like, yes, finally. He's there, he saves the day, he's triumphant, he's epic. It's awesome. And it's kind of infuriating that when we see him in Black Adam, he comes back and we finally believe that he's coming back to be Superman. And he's ready to do a Man of Steel 2. And then he's just gone. Done. Finito. No more Henry Cavill as Superman. And it really bums me out, because every time I watch Man of Steel and I get to the end and Clark Kent goes to the Daily Planet to become reporter Clark Kent, it's one of my favorite endings to a comic book film ever. And just the way that scene is shot, I'm like, I want to see a film like this. I want to see Man of Steel 2 where Superman is a reporter at the Daily Planet working with Lois, and, you know, he goes off and does Superman things on the side. I've wanted to see that in a Man of Steel sequel so badly, and we never got it. And just as we were on the verge of greatness, just as when we thought Henry was coming back to finally get to make his definitive Superman film, he doesn't get to make it. Whilst I really love Man of Steel and I really like Batman vs. Superman and I love Zack Snyder's Justice League and Zack Snyder's take on the DC universe, Henry Cavill never really got his chance to portray the Superman he wanted to portray. He wanted to play comic book Superman. He wanted to be grounded and realistic like the way Snyder envisioned him in Man of Steel. He also wanted to crack a smile, save a cat out of a tree, be nice to kids, be an inspiration to kids, be everybody's friend, because Superman is everybody's friend. And he never really got the chance to do that in the Snyder films. There are hints of it there. You can see it, and you can tell that he is very happy and privileged to be in the Superman costume, and he loves the character so much, he just never got the opportunity to do it on the big screen. And I fully agree with Henry Cavill here. Whilst I like Snyder's take on the character, I would have liked to have seen Superman be more joyful, more optimistic, saving people, more happy, but also I do appreciate and like Snyder's take on the character. Because the thing is that when it comes to, for example, Justice League, they try to overcompensate the dark edginess of Snyder by making Superman goofy and stupid, and it's just tonally inconsistent and it doesn't work. And a positive I will say though in Justice League is that when Henry Cavill is given that goofy ass material, he sells it pretty well. He plays it in a very Superman-like way. I just wish that there was a middle ground between Snyder's take and Justice League. Because Zack Snyder, to me, understands the concept of Superman, but to me, Snyder was always more interested in the God angle of Superman, and not so much the man Clark Kent, when realistically, Superman Clark Kent is Superman. I don't know, it's a weird conundrum, because whilst I like Snyder's take on Superman, I do wish he was a bit more happier and smiling. And the thing is that when he shows up in the post-credit scene of Black Adam, it looked like that's what we were going to get. He was going to be the Superman that smiles but is also tough and badass, and it's taken away from us. Robbed. I mean, come on, man. That smile. That damn smile. Also, a thing that I do want to talk about with Man of Steel is how it pays respect and homage to the previous Superman films before. There is a lot of Richard Donner imagery in this film. For example, during First Flight, when Superman flies around the world, it's very evocative of the image at the end of the Christopher Reeve films where Superman flies in front of the Earth, smiles, and then flies past the camera. That type of referential imagery to me is fine. And I'm happy with that because it's a nice subtle callback without being it very in your face, like, hey look, remember this, we love Donner, we love Reeves. And that type of subtlety is what I think is missing in a lot of comic book films nowadays. Because there is a way to respect the past whilst also paving a way forwards for the future generations. And I think the thing about Man of Steel that is the most symbolic of that idea is Hans Zimmer's score. He creates a Superman theme that is very evocative of the John Williams theme, but also it's a completely different thing. It in itself feels very Superman-like, whilst also being something new and unique. Hans Zimmer's score for this film is incredible. He didn't need to go as hard as he did for this film, but he did, and I love him for it. I mean, what are you going to do when you're not saving the world? The World Engine theme, the Superman Kryptonian battle theme, the dun 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 dun. Incredible. Goodbye My Son is also a very underrated track. It's the track that plays as Jor-El is uploading the codex into Cal's body and Lara and him are preparing the ship. It's phenomenally beautiful. And then of course, there's First Flight. If there is one scene in Man of Steel that I will say is the best Superman scene ever, it's probably the First Flight scene. The score, the camera work, the visual effects, the way Superman moves and interacts with the air and the clouds, it's nothing short of astonishing. Also, fun, weirdo, nerdy fact, every time I watch this scene, you know the part where Superman, like, zips around the canyon and then, like, flies up into the sky? Every time I watch it, I kind of just, like, follow along with my head. And just, like, you know, he's just going around the curve and, like, yeah, I do that. Just a nice fun fact about me. I'm not weird. I'm fine. Also, like I mentioned earlier, the last montage is Superman going to the Daily Planet, becoming Clark Kent, accepting his role as reporter of the Daily Planet, talking to Lois and smiling at the camera. Classic Superman. It's one of my favourite endings to a comic book film ever. I adore it. The way it just hard cuts into the Man of Steel theme, the Man of Steel title card, directed by Zack Snyder. Phenomenal stuff. Man of Steel to me is a very special film. It's a film that made me fall in love with the character of Superman again. Because growing up, I've always loved Superman, and in many ways, the thing that I will say, and I think this might be an unpopular opinion, but if you do not like Superman as a concept, as a hero, and you think he's boring, then you fundamentally shouldn't like the superhero genre, because Superman is the granddaddy of comic book characters. Superman is the superhero. If I could have one superhero exist in the entire world, it would be Superman. Not the Flash, not Captain America, not Spider-Man. Those characters are irrelevant. If a superhero was to exist in the real world, I want it to be Superman. And the core concepts of Superman, the idea of just being the best person you possibly can, of being a good person, a kind person, a friend to all, that is a value I try to live by. I love what Superman stands for and everything he tries to achieve in life. The idea of a truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. Or truth, justice in the American way, whichever one you prefer. I really don't think there's a problem with truth, justice in the American way, because the American way refers to the idea of the American dream and the concept of the American dream. Not of the commercialized American dream, but of the true values of respecting people regardless of their gender, disability, ability, all that kind of stuff. Superman stands to be a friend for everyone. And Man of Steel, I thought, was a nice way to bring Superman in for a modern era to entice modern audiences, because obviously as a kid, I grew up on the Christopher Reeve stuff. I grew up on the Justice League cartoon and the Flash of Superman cartoon. And I love those iterations of Superman. But also, at the same time, I was also at a period in my life in 2013 where I was just slowly getting back into the superhero genre. Amazing Spider-Man brought me back in, and Man of Steel just solidified my love for the character of Superman. I know there's issues with Man of Steel, I literally just talked about them. But at the end of the day, Man of Steel to me is an incredibly rich film with great filmmaking, great visual ideas and visual style. It's a wonderful film, and I love it, and I thank Zack Snyder and the rest of the cast and crew for making this, because no matter how much Warner Brothers tries to bury Zack Snyder, his name, his contribution towards the comic book genre, and his version of the DC Universe, no matter how much they try to erase and bury that, I still have Man of Steel, I still have Batman vs Superman, I still have Zack Snyder's Justice League, and I love everything Zack Snyder did. Would I have loved to have seen Justice League Parts 2 and 3 and then everything else he wanted to do? Yes. But at the end of the day, I still have Man of Steel. I love his DC universe, and I specifically love Man of Steel. But those are just my thoughts. What do you guys think? Do you guys love Man of Steel? Do you hate Man of Steel? Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Let's have a nice, polite, civil discussion, because I don't know why people overreact and get super incredibly passionate about Man of Steel and Snyder, whether he's good or bad. Let's just be civil. That's all I've got for you today. Like, subscribe, follow me on social media, all that good stuff. And until we meet again, I'll see you guys next time.